It's on. I turned it on. All right. For those in the room, you either just love this stuff and you can't get enough, or you're just tired of being out there and talking to people. Either way, I'm glad you're here. We're going to begin. See, you close the doors and then people come in. You don't want to be excluded, is that it? All right. Well, let's begin with a quick word of prayer. Heavenly Father, I thank you for the day that you've given us. I thank you for your creation, which sings of your praise and lets us know just how creative and loving of a God that you are. I pray, Lord, that you would grant us your Holy Spirit as we consider not only your word, but the world in which you have blessed us. Give us eyes to see and a mind to think and to understand the beauty of your creation. In the name of Jesus, amen. All right, so quick update from last week. So I spent the whole time talking last week about why this topic matters. And the topic being, is creation the real thing, or is evolution the real thing? I tend to be one that says they can't be both. There are some that have tried to marry the two to bring the interpretation of religion following science to get to the truth. And I don't think science should be the leader. I think God's word should be the lead. And then let science come from that. And so I really don't want to try to prove to you that God created. Because I can't, Unless we can all go back and be witnesses to the event and do a live stream of the creation. We just have the evidence that's before us to look at. It's the same truth of evolution. They can't go back. They got to go a lot further back than we do. We only have to go back, 8,000 years to see God create. They got to go back 13.8 billion years to see the Big Bang and all that comes out of that. So none of us, science can't prove either. As much as they want to tell you science can prove evolution, science does not have the capability to actually prove what happened 6,000 years ago, let alone 13 billion years ago. And so all we are left with is the remnant, the echo, the evidence. And we all have the same evidence, and it's just a matter of how do we interpret that which we see. Do we have the lens that says everything has to fall into the scientific worldview of evolution and long ages, or do we have the lens and view that says God created? And so what I want to do in the class is kind of just present the evidence and then you decide. I can't convince you one way or the other, but maybe the evidence, you can ask the question, well, what does this evidence point to? Does this suggest billions of years, or does this suggest a much younger earth and a creator God? And so we were wrapping up with dinosaurs, which is one. I love it. I told you that last week. I love the dinosaur talk. And we went to the Bible in the book of Job, and we read about Leviathan and Behemoth, two descriptions of what I would say are clearly describing what we would consider dinosaurs today. And the other fact that we brought up last week is that the name dinosaur, the word dinosaur, isn't that old, 1850s, I think. And it's a word that means terrible lizard. It was coined by the guy who was digging in the ground, finding the bones. Prior to that, I think the term that was used somewhat universally was the word dragon. And that makes sense. Dragons and dinosaurs kind of look the same. We tend to put dragons more in a mythological category and dinosaurs more in a scientific category. But if you think about the history of it, they're all really the same thing. And so now we're going to look at some of the evidence for the dinosaurs and man being contemporaries, living at the same time. Because if evolution is true, 65 million years separates dinosaur from man. So there would be zero evidence of any kind that they ever lived together. That's a long time to be gapped, right? If creation is correct, then we would expect there to be evidence that man and dinosaurs lived together because they were both created on day 6 at the same time. So, is there any evidence? All right. So I'm trying to move the slides here. There. All right. Let me show you some of these pictures here. All right. This is 2 different places. The first 3 slides are the same place. It's just kind of like zeroing you in. All right. So this is ancient structures that they have found with ancient carvings. And so that first row leads us to this image. Okay, so you kind of, it's like, here's the structure, and there's an arrow pointing, and here's a little thing, and then it got closer, and then this is kind of the blow-up picture. Now this structure's dated well before we discovered dinosaur bones. All right. But what do you see in that drawing or in that carving? A stegosaurus, pretty good stegosaurus. There's a bit of a ring there. You hear that? Turn me down just a hair. Now, for the evolutionist, when they see this, they have to say that's not a dinosaur picture. That's something else. And they would point to errors in, like, okay, the tail isn't right, you know. Now, the question I would say, well, who knows what that looks like? The guy who dug up its bones and tried to put the bones together. By the way, how many complete stegosaurus examples do we have in the whole world? Do you know? 3 complete. It's not like there's not an overwhelming amount of like this is what they look like kind of evidence, and all we have are fossilized bones. So do we believe that the scientists put it together and that's what it looked like, or do we believe perhaps this carving is by a dude who was like looking at the thing walking across in front of him? By the way, in this location is where one of the full Stegosaurus fossils was found. The second picture there, you back up there, this is the bottom one. This is the archway underneath that arch. And so then you go up and they have what we would call cave drawings, these ancient things. And that's the close-up. So you see 2 things clearly in that picture. You see a man and what we would say is a sauropod, a dinosaur. Type of dinosaur. Again, in that region, they found sauropod fossils. Now, are we to believe that ancient people, dug up some of those fossils, put them together, and then drew what they put together on the cave walls? like modern man who says that's 75 million years? That's what we do. We dig them up, we put them together, and we go, hey, this is what it looks like, and we make cool movies about them coming back to life, Is that what do we believe that's just what man does? We dig up bones and we put them back together, like for all, or do we go, no, they probably drew what they saw. Okay? So another example. This is called the Jules Rudd Collection. And there's these are tiny little figurines carved out of a couple of different mediums. And they're found in Mexico. Over 33,000 figures were found in this collection. Most of those 33,000 were just everyday animals and people, like we still have. Nothing extraordinary. But several thousand of them look like dinosaurs. And these statues have been dated to 2500 BC. Now, the dinosaurs were supposed to have been extinct by that point, 64,955,000, long before. So, again, are we to believe that they were digging up fossils and putting them together and making creatures that look like what we think they look like? Or are we to believe that this is the figment of their imagination and they're like, this is cool, let's make an animal that looks like this? Or do we believe that they carved the animals that they saw, like the rest of the collection, which is animals that they saw and we still have? Now, the one on the right, I pulled this one out as a specific picture because this was a theropod dinosaur. And you see the theropod dinosaurs, the big brachiosaurs, whatever they call it, on like Jurassic Park. It's one of the first scenes. Huge animal eating the leaves, and it's got the long neck and the sloping back and the huge tail. That's the behemoth that's described in Job. And for the longest time, including up until and after this collection was found, we believed that those animals had a smooth neck, back, and tail. But the sculpture here clearly has plates on it. And then so it was. Then the evolutionists said, "Yeah, see, it's just a made-up animal. They don't have plates." And then in 1992, they discovered a theropod dinosaur with plates on its back. So again, the evidence. What's the evidence pointing to? Does it point to 65 million years and some ancient carver got lucky on his guess? Or does it point to dinosaurs and man were living together and he was simply taking a picture or carving an animal that he saw? Other examples, these are sort of ancient dinosaurs of archaeology. So you have the Shang dynasty there in China. Again, back into BC, between 1766 and 1122. I love the second statue there. Why do you think I love the second statue? Huh? Because there's a man riding a dinosaur. It's dragon riding, essentially, right? Every kid's dream, and still mine to this day. Now, we don't necessarily, those don't look like anything necessarily that we would say, oh, we immediately recognize. This picture here, I love this one here. This is an artist painting. The painting is called The Suicide of Saul. It's painted by Flemish Renaissance artist Peter Bruegel the Elder. It was painted in 1562, which is 300 years before dinosaur bones were discovered. At least that we know that they were discovered. Oh, I'm looking at it, you're not. This painting. I got to remember that. All right. Suicide of Paul. 300 years before dinosaurs were discovered. Now, evolutionists actually make fun of creationists for pointing to this picture. Because creationists go, that looks like a dinosaur, and it's people riding a dinosaur. And the evolutionists make fun of them, saying, you're just dumb. What that is, those are camels painted by a man who had never seen a camel. Okay, I mean, that's plausible. I guess that's a plausible explanation. Right? I can, especially the one on the top, I can start to see a camel. In the one on the top, in the middle there. These ones at the bottom look very dinosaur-like to me. So again, the evidence, this is the evidence. We have art showing man riding dinosaurs or really weird-looking camels, depending on your point of view. Again, I'm not trying to tell you which is real. I'm just saying, is there any evidence that man and dinosaur lived together? This next one, again, this one is very controversial footprints here. The one on the right. Creationists love this because they go, look, there's a human footprint and a dinosaur footprint in the same rock. Evolutionists say that this is fake. All right, now, if you notice, this dinosaur toe is pushing into the mud. If it was wet mud, it would have been pushing the mud into the foot down first. Hard to carve that. You know what I'm saying? If it was fake. I don't know. Is it real? I don't know. It's got a weird history. I'm going to be fully clear on that. The guy who discovered it and found it, he was working this fossil area there in Texas, and he had taken a whole bunch of fossils, dug them all out, took them home to study them, and then came back out and go, look what I found. Okay, that's weird. I would have preferred him to find it and be like, whoa, check this out. Everyone's there. You know what I mean? That would have been cleaner. I don't know. So there's a lot of, there's evidence they can point to it. But yeah, so the thing with the fossil record, the dinosaurs, we're both using the same thing. We're gonna go now from dinosaurs into kind of more complete fossil record here. But again, it's the same evidence. So which supports what we see, and the good scientific theory, and let's call creation a theory in equal terms. Okay, a good scientific theory makes predictions, and then you go and test those predictions. That's the scientific method. Who teaches that in this room? Do you teach that yet? 3rd grade? You're the highest teacher we have in here? Okay, they haven't learned that yet in 3rd grade, but I'm pretty sure that's the scientific method. All right, so here's this is what would be predictions of evolution. If you're looking at the fossil record, evolution would say that you would see gradual change and descent with modification. So you would see these creatures evolving into new creatures within the fossil record. That was Darwin's biggest prediction when he was done with his work. And he said, look, at this point, we haven't done enough study. The fossil record is incomplete, but I know that they'll find all of this stuff later. You would see what we call transitional fossils. This is between some kind of fossil between this creature that evolved into this creature. There would be a nested pattern of resemblances. And so what that basically means is common features from common descent. So, like I said last week, two eyes are common. Like everything has two eyes, almost. And so evolutionists say, see that we evolved eyes somewhere up the family tree. And as it branched out, everything had two eyes, common descent. Now, for creationists, we would go like, no, that's common creator. Like, we got one creator, and he's like, you know what works well? Two eyes. Let's give everything two eyes. You would see no reversals. If things are evolving, they're not devolving. They're going forward. And you would see a systemic change throughout time. Those would be the predictions of evolution in the fossil record. Now, creation, we would predict that you would find no transitional forms. God created according to their kinds. That's what we would expect to find in the fossil record. Sure, some things are extinct and we don't have them anymore, but we wouldn't expect to see transitions. We would expect to see an abrupt appearance. God created and boom, there it was, nothing and then everything. We would expect to see limited variation. And according to the Bible, catastrophic burial. So if I haven't said this yet, there are 3 Sunday school lessons that are ever so important in the creation debate. Creation, number 1. Noah's flood and the Tower of Babel. You use those 3 stories, it explains everything that we see. If you don't have those 3 stories, or you don't believe those 3 stories are factual, then none of the other evidence makes sense. you need a catastrophic, world-ending flood event. And then the Tower of Babel, you remember that story? It's right after the flood. It's like the next story. So after the flood, Noah, his 3 sons, their 3 wives come off the boat. They start to repopulate the earth. God says to them the same thing that God said to Adam and Eve: be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. That was God's intent for creation, that the earth would be filled with his worship and praise. And the Tower of Babel says the people were all together, and they thought, hey, if we stay here together, we can make a name for ourselves. And God says, that's not the plan. And he comes down and he confuses their language. Well, where do we get nations and races and languages? Because you know what's fascinating about language, right? When we go to the historic record, languages just appear. There's never like fully formed. And other than, people like Tolkien writing Lord of the Rings and writing his own language to go with it, it's not usually how, that's kind of mind-blowing. And if you think about it, everyone's together doing this tower thing. God comes down, confuses them. We all spread out now. Now you've got nations, and everyone's going to go a little differently based on where they're at. But they're going to carry with them some common stories. And you know what is the universally true story of all ancient cultures? The flood. And that makes perfect sense to us, because we go, yeah, it just happened. And now that they're all spread, now the stories, they diverge a little bit here and there, but they're all the basic same thing. There was one good man, and God saved him by putting him on a boat, and he saved all the animals, and the world was flooded. Universal. Now, for evolutionists, that's got to be some kind of weird, just natural story that man would create if man was left alone. Is that a universal idea? That the world would be flooded by an angry God? I don't know, maybe. It just seems like more likely that they all were related to Noah. And then they all spread out, and then they all have this story. We'll come back to that family line maybe today, maybe tomorrow. All right. So limited variation, catastrophic burial, and then a near complete record. We about have everything. That's what creation would suggest we would find in the fossil record. All right. There's this idea called homology, which is this common features thing, and it's a big one that both groups use. This is what I was describing by common descent or common creator. Now, for evolutionists, not everything fits in, and so I call evolution the unfalsifiable theory. Because anytime, the way scientific theories work is, if you prove my theory right, it doesn't make it right. But if you prove my theory wrong, it's wrong. Does that make sense? So let me give you an example. If my theory is all horses are brown, and I see a brown horse, does that make my theory true? No, so far. But if I see a white horse, my theory's automatically proven false. So false things kill the theory, where true things, they don't make it true, they support it, but they don't automatically make it true, right? What's that? Yeah, so evolution is unfalsifiable because they just make up new theories to keep propping up the evolutionary theory. So when something falsifies it, they create a new theory to prop it up. Dinosaurs is a great example because, in recent years, what they've discovered in the bones of specifically T-Rex is blood cells, collagen, pliable material. And a 65 million year old fossil. Now, normally we would go, well, that can't be 65 million years old then. No blood cells and stuff is still surviving. Well, now they had, this evolution's true. Dinosaurs are 65 million years old. That's true. So now we have to figure out how red blood cells and pliable materials still exist. So we create a theory for how that would have survived. Does that make sense? So we're adding theories to make sure that evolution stays true. And so this homology thing, there's evidence that explains homology, but then there's these things called convergences or homoplases, which is like structures that are the same, but they cannot have a common ancestor. It doesn't make any sense for that. And so they create other theories to continue to prop that up. One of them is called LGT, lateral gene transfer, where this is the theory, where genes are transferred from one organism to another, like copy and paste on a computer through viruses or some other means. Now, we've never seen that happen, like where you would take a part of your DNA and like transmit it to another creature by a virus or something else. But that doesn't matter that we've never seen it. It would explain how some of these things got passed on. You believe what you want to believe. All right. So this guy here, George Wald, this is his quote. Time is, in fact, the hero of the plot. Given so much time, the impossible becomes possible. The possible becomes probable, and the probable virtually certain. One only has to wait. Time itself performs the miracles. And he is a Nobel laureate. He's not just some like idiot. Like, he's not me making some great quote. No, he's a smart guy. And that's how we see what we see in evolution. So much of their stuff we don't see, and they tell us we don't see it because we don't have enough time. And we're just supposed to go, well, okay, let me know when you see it. I mean, I don't know how that works. Now, I actually am famous in this debate. I'm going to show you why. This is a quote from our good friend Bill Nye, the science guy. There is no place, not one single example of a fossil from any layer trying to swim its way up into a more recent deposit. There is not one instance of this in any stratum anywhere on Earth. If you find one, you will turn science on its head. You will be famous. Believe me, people are looking, and I have a picture. It's called a polystrate fossil. It's a fossil that goes right through the layers. It's a tree growing up through what they say are millions of years of evolution. And there are thousands of polystrate fossils around the world. And I would assume Bill Nye knows that. But he says, no, they don't exist. They're nowhere. They do exist. It's right there. Here's some other fossils. And this kind of goes into like how are fossils made, right? What do you see there? But 3 fossils of fish eating other fish. They're literally fossilized at lunch. That's not a slow process. That is catastrophic, an instantaneous burial. And that makes perfect sense because, I mean, things die in our world all the time. They don't turn into fossils. They get eaten. Starts with the birds or whatever, then the ants and the worms and the bugs, and it doesn't take long before the dead thing is gone. That's nature, right? The recycled nature thing. So to make a fossil, something has to have just recently died or still be living and be buried rather quickly to preserve it, to keep it from being, eaten and all that kind of stuff. Well, what event do we know in the Bible that would bury a whole lot of stuff really, really quick, right? But Noah's flood. I believe that almost all of the fossils in the world were laid down in 1 year during the flood of Noah. So here's the fossil record. Okay. Now this is their names and their ages and all that kind of stuff and how far back they go. And then there's another little version of it, forms of life. All right, let me see if I can get some of this right. So, fossils. Let's just talk about it. Let's just say Noah's flood is real. Okay? Wink, wink. So, if the world is being rapidly covered in water, and I think we have a children's story version of Noah's flood where it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and they're in the boat, and the draft's heads are sticking out the window, you know. That's not what Noah's flood was. A catastrophic, world-changing event in ways that we won't ever understand because again we can't go back there. A couple of facts though. How old were people before Noah's flood? Hundreds of years. Oldest man in the Bible, Methuselah, 969 years old. After the flood, right at that time, God said that he will not contend with man forever. He limits their years. You know what the limit was that he put on man in the Bible? God limits their years to 120. Okay. Do you know anybody that makes it that far? That'd be good. We'd be like, well done, you. That's pretty old, right? What happens after the flood with the ages of people? Do they just cut off and go to 120? Like God said? No, they wind down. So the world pre-flood allowed people to live to almost 1,000 years old. The world post-flood, we die before 120. So something changed in this world. The Bible describes it as the earth ripped open and the great fountains of the deep. For the longest time, Christians were ridiculed. There's not enough water in the world to flood the earth and cover all the mountains, was what they would say. You know what they discovered a couple years, I think it's like a year ago, like this year, just discovered this. They discovered a subterranean ocean 70 miles below the surface that they estimate has at least 5 times the amount of water as all of our oceans on the surface. Well, that fits our narrative pretty well, doesn't it? And if you can imagine, I'm not a scientist, I play one on TV, but if you can imagine 70 miles of rock, the pressure that would put on water changes it, right? So water can get up to boiling temperature on the surface, and that's it, 200 and whatever it is. We'll say 100 degrees Celsius. No one uses Celsius except for boiling. 100, right? And that's as hot as you can get it. You can add a few things to get it a little hotter, but you know how you can get it hotter? Pressure. You put 70 miles of rock kind of pressure on water, the temperature would be extreme. The amount of pressure would be. If that ripped open, all right, the earth would be unbelievably damaged. You know, the whole, like the look of our planet, if you've ever looked at our planet, you know, the continents look like they used to be together, don't they? Kind of fit, what do you call that? Pangea, thank you, I forget that. Pangea, right, one continent. Well, that's very possible. And then you see what's called the transatlantic ridge, which is looks like a seam of a baseball right through the Atlantic Ocean. That's the trench and all that. That's where I think the ocean, of the deep burst forth, just split the planet. And then the continents went flying. Today, the continental drift is measured in centimeters and inches a year. And then we go, oh, well, if it's an inch a year and there's 4 billion inches, then this has been drifting for 4 billion years. Maybe. Or that one year, those continents went flying. Because you know what happens when you look at the continents? If you think about North America running away from Europe and then coming up to some kind of resistance, and that whole continent would just rise up, and then what do you get? The Rocky Mountains. And the same thing happens on the other side. This is going away, and that continent reaches resistance, and it would just rise up, and what do you get? The Alps. It's amazing how the mountains mirror the coastlines. Now, can we go back? We can't. I don't know if this is true. This is right. We can't go back and look, but we have to have the flood, and we have to understand just how catastrophic this flood was to make sense of what we see in the world. All right, so the world's being flooded, massive amounts of flood. What is the thing that we would think would be the most fossilized thing if the water is the issue? Sea life. What 95% of all fossils, sea life. And where do we find those fossils? Everywhere. On the top of every mountain range, they find sea fossils. Well, that makes perfect sense if you have a worldwide flood. It makes no sense if you don't, right? So sea life gets buried first. Okay, what would be no record of life. Now, if you just look at the things there, this is like the layers, right? You got microorganisms, single-celled stuff, and more complex, okay. And here's the beauty. I love this because it makes perfect sense to me from both ways. If you were evolving from single cell to advanced, you would expect the fossil record to be like, single cell stuff. The reason they think we all came out of the ocean is because we have so many ocean fossils. That's the next layer. And then you get more complex, then you get into land animals and then birds. You've heard the dinosaurs evolved into birds, right? Okay. I can see that that you're looking at that and saying that's how things evolved. Now let's think about the world flooding. You know what's not moving very well? These single-cell organisms. You know what's next in the fossil record? Trees and plants and stuff. You know what doesn't move very well when a flood comes? A tree. How do trees get buried in multiple layers of strata? Because they're alive and all of this stuff is being buried upon it. That's not millions of years. That's a rough week, And then the more advanced land animals live a little bit longer. They're running away from the flood. And you know what survives the longest? The birds. They're like, oh, we're getting out of here. So our story makes perfect sense too on how that stuff is laid down. But fossils like these fish, eating fish, that doesn't happen with their story of slow, over time kind of stuff. I don't even know, they don't even have good stories of how fossils are made, because it's literally a lot of local floods in evolution. No universal flood. But that universal flood is so necessary for our story. All right. So this is so-called missing links, because remember, missing links would have to be present if evolution is true, and if creation is true, we'd be like, there are no missing links. Everything's there. So this is supposedly this is this for evolutionists represents a clear pattern of evolution from fish to mammal. Does that look like a clear like line from one thing moving to the next thing? And those are, I don't, it doesn't look that clear to me. I know I'm just a dumb pastor and what do I know? But it's drawings like this that's nothing more than like they're just drawings. But they become fact. I mean, does this look like clear ascent from flipper to feet? That's what they're telling us. So these missing links, that's a big deal, right? So this is I would call this the golden child missing link today. I don't know how to say that word. There's too many A's in the middle. The Tidalic, however you say that word. Huh? Amanda, how do you say that? You don't know. Okay. So this is supposedly a missing link. Now they got a drawing, so to help prove that it's a missing link. This is a creature coming out of the water onto the lands. So this was discovered 2006. A team of scientists unveiled this discovery, the Tidalic rosé. It's a fossil fish. They call it a fishapod. Now, Darwin's theory came out in 1859. So it's just 147 years to find this missing link. And this is one of the ones they use a lot right now. They've had other missing links. It's not like it took them 147 years to get their first missing link. The coelacanth was described as a missing link. You guys, have you heard of the coelacanth? Coelacanth is a fish. It's a fish that supposedly went extinct millions and millions of years ago. And they got the bones and the fossils, and they're looking at this thing, and it had a large chest cavity and some pretty stout flippers. And so they said, this is evidence that the coelacanth is developing feet and lungs in this large chest cavity. And the coelacanth was a missing link that they put out in textbooks for years. And then something happened. Do you know what happened? Huh? They caught one alive. And they're like, oh, there's no lungs in that thing. And those flippers aren't feet. It's a bottom crawler. And that's the kind of stuff that happens all the time. Looking at bones and telling me what that animal was like. And it's not even bones. Fossils are not the bones anymore. Fossils are minerals that have replaced the bones in the same spot as the bones, so it looks like a bone. Does that make sense? So telling me a story about how that thing lived or hunted or was developing lungs, all of it is just a story. So this happens enough. You'll like this irony. This happens enough that they have a title for it. It's called Lazarus taxonomy, where something that they thought was extinct comes back to life. Now, where do they get the word Lazarus from? That's our story, right? So Lazarus taxonomy, they find things that they thought were dead, and now they come back, and now it's not, back to life. How, anybody know, I just read this the other day, percentage of the sea floor that we have explored as a species. It's less than 1. Less than 1. You know, this planet that we live on, okay, here's another fun one. On land, the Amazon rainforest, how much of that have we explored? Less than 20%. Less than 20%. That's on land. So finding new creatures, we find new creatures all the time. You ever watch Shark Week? Love that show. Or that thing. So Shark Week, like every year they have like scientific groups that are literally just going out into the ocean trying to find new species of shark. And what's cool is that they always do. They always find new stuff that we didn't know. So we don't like science has this we trust us, we're science, But if you really get into it and you go, but do you know? Right? Like, this is why I am a firm believer that Megalodon still lives. Who's with me on that? Megalodon? Nobody? Megalodon is a 60, 70-foot shark. Great whites are 20 feet. So here's why I say they're still alive. They find Megalodon teeth, fossilized teeth, all the time. And then they go, oh, that tooth is 4 million years or whatever it is. And you're like, or it just fell out of that giant shark's mouth and floated to the surface. I don't know. All right. I'm just getting dumb and nerdy on that stuff. Okay. Some other evidence with the fossil record. 2010 fossil footprints were discovered, and these were supposedly from 397 million years ago. But that's before evolution from fish to amphibian was supposed to have happened. So what was making the footprint if there were no feet? And remember last week, and I showed you all those articles where it's like, new discovery changes everything we thought we knew. It's this kind of stuff where they go, there were, feet hadn't been evolved yet, and then they go, but there's footprints, and they go, yeah, let's rethink the story. We need to change the timeline. That kind of stuff happens all the time. It's fairly consistent how one little discovery can change everything that we thought we knew. Turtles, this is another example. Turtles, they say, is a good evidence. Creationists like to use it because turtles are the same, man. Like, they're one of those creatures that there's no real obvious thing it came from, and they're still here. So they did find a turtle that only has a shell on the bottom. It hasn't developed the top shell yet. And they go, see, that's evidence that it's a missing link. It's evolving into the turtles that we have today. Or this kind of turtle is known to live on the surface of the water. And where does it need protection? From animals coming at it from below. So it doesn't necessarily show that the shell was evolving as much as it shows the creature that maybe we don't have anymore, and it just looked a little different. All right, now, of course, the big missing link for everybody is going to be monkey to man, right? We all know that we were just a bunch of monkeys, right? If you ever really dive into the science of this paleoarchaeology, where they're digging up the bones, it quite frankly might be the worst science that we have, right? Because I think one of the bedrocks of science is that it's like an open book. Here's my theory, here's my test, replicate it, prove me wrong. That's what science is supposed to be. Paleoarchaeology is my bones. Like, they don't share. And they'll find bones, and they will take them away to their lab, and they will study them for years. And then they'll come out, and they'll put their paper out to the world, and then nobody gets to verify anything that they said. Now, how do you think you get funding to search for missing link monkey-to-man fossils? Where do you think you get the money? Well, by having some success, by digging up some stuff, telling a good story. Have you heard of Lucy? Lucy's one of the famous monkey. This is Lucy on the screen. The drawing it's not a photo. That's an artist rendering. So Lucy is said to be proof of a missing link between monkey to man. About 40% of her skeleton was discovered. That photograph is all of it that they found. And they say, based on the knee joint and the big toe, they believe Lucy was a bipedal, a walker on her feet. Um, now, can you point to her knee joint and her big toe on the picture? It's not there. Her big toe bone was found supposedly 10 years later at a site miles away. Fascinating. Recent work on Lucy suggested that she was a knuckle walker. She's got fixed wrist joints, and they did a CAT scan of the inner ear. However they did that, I don't know. But they suggested it would not allow her to continually walk upright. But that's, Lucy's in every textbook that we have as proof. There's other examples, missing links. Nebraska man. He was once heralded as a missing link. It turns out that the whole discovery was a single tooth. And later, that same tooth was discovered in the mouth of a living pig. Oh. Piltdown man. He was once heralded as a missing link. Turned out the whole thing was a big hoax. It was like the last week of funding before they ran out, and they combined bones from a human and a gibbon, and said that they found this thing. They named it Australopithecines. Now they knew that Australopithecines was a category. But it was a category created by a known fake. But when they realized it was a fake, they didn't get rid of the category. They backfilled it with other discoveries. I'm telling you, it's the weirdest thing. I have a book. It's called Bones of Contention. If you're ever interested in reading all about how these fossils are found and stuff like that, you would believe nothing that they ever told you after reading this book. You're like, this is just total junk science. Java man, Homo erectus turns out to be a variety of real human. There's a guy, a creationist, who does a very good job of having human skulls and monkey skulls, gibbons, gorillas, whatever. And he says here are the differences. It has to do with the forehead, as we would say, or the ridge bone, and then the eye sockets. So, like, can you see the eye socket from the side? Right, if you're holding the skull in the sideways. And he says those two things will tell you every single time, is it a monkey or is it a man? And he holds up all of the examples of so-called missing links, and he goes, what do you see? Do you see the eyes or do you see the forehead? And he says, that's a monkey, it's a man. And he goes through every single one of them, and it becomes easy to tell, is that a monkey or a man? I mean, just look around the world today. There's 8 billion people. Do you think all of our skulls would look the exact same? There's some tiny little people that would have little bitty little skulls. And then there's some massive people that have a big old gnarly skull. Right? Hard to say one way or the other. And then the last thought, and we'll end it here because then next week we'll hit Noah's flood. The whole idea of monkey to man evolution, or any evolution, is anatomical. How did we change? How did our DNA change to become more upright and to be able to use our hands and make tools and all this kind of stuff? But nowhere does evolution account for what I would say are the bigger differences between monkey and man. Where does evolution say our sense of humor came from? Right? Or our language, or our empathy. Altruism has nothing to, there's no evolutionary advantage for me to go out of my way to help you. Where did that come from? So, in other words, the anatomy, the DNA, it's not enough to describe who we are and what our differences are between us and other creatures. But again, the Bible has an answer. we were created in the image of God. We are unique in all of creation. And that uniqueness would include care for others. Okay? All right. We end it there. Next week, it's going to be a lot of Noah's flood stuff, a lot more just hypothesis on this next week. I'm just making stuff up. But yeah, sir. I can't comprehend what? Well, that would be, who is it, Feynman's theory? I don't know. There's a famous physicist theory which would say that the theory of our universe has to include the idea that the universe could support a life that could rise up to ask the question about our universe. Right? So that's what we're doing. Like, how do we account for that? I got my answer. All right. We're out of time. Band needs practice. Thank you, guys. We'll see you next time. Bring your questions next time if you want. Yes, sir.